He's the ultimate employer, and he's the ultimate friend and father and parent. He's the reason you're here. He's the reason you live. He's the reason you die. So it is paramount. It is more important than anything else to know what he requires of you. Everything else is just secondary. It comes afterwards. So, what does he require of us? We would never know unless he told us. So, he wrote the Bible. How convenient. I'm going to be reading out of Ecclesiastes, and before you put it up there, just a little explaining of the book. Ecclesiastes was written by a guy named Solomon, who was the son of David, the king of Israel. And at the time when Solomon wrote Ecclesiastes, he was the single most powerful, wealthiest, feared and loved man on the planet. There was nobody, like the buck stopped with Solomon. He had more money, more armies, more women, more, castles and palaces and, indoor swimming pools than anybody else. And he wrote Ecclesiastes as it was sort of chronicling his desire to find purpose and meaning in life. And he has all of these things at his expense. He's able to do whatever he wants. And so in his pursuit of happiness and purpose, he spends as much money, he acts irresponsibly. He acts responsibly, he goes to all these different extremes to find purpose in life and never finds it. And at the very end of the book, you can put it up now, he says this: the end of the matter, all has been heard. So this is his conclusion. He's like, you guys have heard everything I've had to say, all these different ways of trying to find purpose and meaning in life. But here is the end of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment with every secret thing, whether good or evil. Fear God and keep his commandments. That is what we are responsible for. That is our main responsibility. To understand that, to act on that, is to be a responsible man and woman of God. Later on in the Bible, I know we kind of understand, it's kind of difficult to understand what it means to fear God, but he also talks about following his commandments. And Jesus makes it a little easier on us later on in the Bible. In the Gospels, he sort of condenses the commandments and says the most important commandment of all of them is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Heart, soul, mind, and strength. That's like basically all that you are. That's everything. Physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. He said, take everything that you are and love God with it. And fear God with it. When you find yourself in love with somebody, or maybe not in love with a guy or girl of the opposite sex or something like that, but just loving somebody, wanting a relationship with somebody, you are drawn toward them, but you're in fear of what they think of you. It's like a double-edged sword. Fear and love are two of the biggest reasons why we do anything that we do. So now that's sort of a big, epic, grand scheme of things kind of picture of what responsibility is, and it's kind of hard to chew on. But what does it look like in our everyday lives? We understand now what it means to be responsible to God. The big, huge responsibilities: love God and fear God. But what does this really look like in our everyday lives? What does this look like for you guys in particular? Right now, at your guys' age, at most of your age, high school and younger, you guys really don't have very much responsibility. There's not much you're responsible for. You don't have to worry about where your next meal is going to come from. You don't have to worry about money. You don't have to worry about where you're going to sleep. You don't have to worry about transportation. Your parents are responsible for you. They take care of you. They have the money. They have the house. They have the food. And you're taken care of. You don't have to worry about it. You're not responsible for yourself, basically. That's sort of where you guys are right now. And I know this because I was there. When I was your age, I think I had it even easier. Me and my sister, Up until I was about 15, we were never put in school, even. We were allowed to do, not necessarily whatever we wanted, but we woke up in the morning and we could just go out and play in the dirt all day. Play with sticks, climb trees, play with friends whenever we could, eat, poop, and sleep. And that was pretty much my life. I was responsible for nothing. My mother would occasionally ask me to do the dishes or take out the garbage. And I would never do it with a good mood. I would always complain about it and disrespect my mother. And I had zero responsibility. There was nothing I really had to worry about. My parents took care of it. I didn't have to do anything that was hard. For about the first 15 years of my life, that's what I got to do. Very sheltered, kind of, had a few friends, but, pretty much limited to my family. And as a result of that, for the first 15 years of my life, my dad was the only example of a man in my life. And my mother was the only example of a woman in my life. That's all I understood. My dad took us to church, and it was nice. I knew the Bible was important. I knew that Jesus was important, but I looked up to my dad. I looked up to my mother. They were my examples. And I didn't realize it at the time, but the reality in the world that my parents created for me and my siblings was actually very messed up. It was really messed up. My father was quite abusive to my family, especially to my mother. My father did go to church, but he kind of used the Bible for his own purposes. He wasn't really sincere about it, and he kind of would hit you over the head with the Bible. And my mother lived in fear. She was always walking on eggshells around him, and she didn't know how to defend herself. She grew up in an abusive home as well, so it was normal for her as well. That was the world that she was used to living in. And she didn't know how to defend herself, much less defend her children. She tried, but that was the reality me and my sister and my little brothers grew up in. And things really just got worse and worse and worse. And it kind of reached a breaking point when I was about 15 years old. And my father was, always angry. And now, by this point, we were all walking on eggshells around him, hoping that he wouldn't explode. And my mother was just a crying mess all the time. She was moping around the house and just unmotivated, living in fear. And me and my sister, who were quite a bit older than my younger brothers at the time, were kind of confused and scared and just, frightened, because everything that we knew was systematically being destroyed. It was slowly deteriorating, and I remember that last year we were with my dad was just awful. Awful. He was angry all the time. They were fighting all the time. Me and my sister were just miserable, trying to have fun like we had up till that point and not being able to. I loved both of my parents very much, and I still do. And I do my best to honor and respect them, but at the time, when I was 15, I realized that that was not, that world that they had created for me, the place that I grew up in, was not the family that God intended. And that it was not, my father was not the man he was supposed to be. My mother was not the woman she was supposed to be. And my father had the right idea, but was misguided. My mother was living in fear. And I remember coming to my mother after I realized this and saying, you have to leave my dad. You guys have to get a divorce. You guys have to separate. And my mom was terrified of the concept. She was terrified of the idea. And she couldn't do it. So me and my sister, we packed up our things and we put it in the car, and we walked our mom to the car, and we had her drive us away with my little brothers. And that was the beginning of a awful 5 years. I'd started this long process of divorce. It took them like 5 years to finally get divorced. And the whole time, my mother was in the courtroom dealing with horrible attorneys, pro bono attorneys who didn't know what they were doing. And my father and my mother were just having this legal battle over me and my sister and my little brothers and the house and the cars and money. And it was just, and I saw every bit of it. And my mother was just torn apart. But she kept on going. And within the first year of being away from my dad, we came here to this church. And Pastor Terry, the senior pastor here, his wife, Debbie, heard that me and my sister had zero education. And she encouraged my mother to take us into public school. And I hated the idea. But they sent us in. I was still like 15 or 16, and they put me in Ridgetop Junior High when I was supposed to be in high school. And that was like the worst. I had to be around all these selfish people, you know. I mean, up to that point I had been so sheltered, and then to be thrust into all these other kids who were just so mean and selfish and self-absorbed, and these teachers were teaching me these things I just did not care about. And failed my science class and passed everything else with like a D and C, and I was not very responsible at Ridgetop Junior High. And I remember after that, I was fed up, and I talked to my mom and I said, I can't do another year of public school. That was like torture. I want to die, you know, knowing that I have to go back there. And there wasn't really much that she could do. She didn't have a job. She didn't really have means of putting me anywhere else. So I flew down to Virginia, and I babysat my cousins for a summer. And my aunt and uncle paid me and sent me back to Washington, and I got my first job at 17. And it was with a friend. He had his own business, and we were working on Bainbridge Island, putting up Christmas lights and doing exterior house cleaning. That was my first job. And basically from 17 I became financially independent because my mom was supported by the state. And so my money was going both to my mom and to my education, because I found myself a private school here in Paulsville that I loved the teacher and I loved the classmates. And I was like, all right, this is my way out of public school. So I paid my way through high school. And and I helped my mother with all the bills, and with the food, and with transportation. Bought myself a car, and it was really hard to do all these things. And I didn't really recognize what I was doing at the time, but I remember when I was 15, I had the choice to either become the man of the house, because my dad had failed. He had failed my mom, he had failed me, and my sister, and my younger brothers. I had the choice to sort of take over where he failed, or to stay where I was, in fear of him, and you know, in ignorance and fear. And I did not want that. I knew the Bible was important. I knew Jesus was important. I knew what it taught was important. And I knew that this is not what God wanted for anybody. And so I decided to become a man. I didn't think about it that way at the time. I thought, well, I mean, this is what I have to do. Otherwise, you know, rubber creek without a paddle. So I did it. And I remember getting into the Bible, and Ecclesiastes was first recommended to me by my first boss, my first job. His name's Jeremy. He still goes here. And he said, Michael, you should read Ecclesiastes sometime. And I did. And I read through it in like a week or something like that. It's a short book. If you guys ever get the chance to read it, you should. It's kind of depressing, but it's a really good book. And I was like, wow. It just gave me such clarity, you know? And this was within just a year or two of me being away from my father. And that's where my growth started. And I'm not trying to say that I'm the most responsible person in the world. You know, there's plenty of moments of irresponsibility in my life. And a little confession, that science class at Richtown was not the only class I ever failed. So, I was kind of forced into it. God put me in a situation where I had, you know, misery or hard work. And I chose hard work. And that's what responsibility is. The Bible says, love and fear God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And you can say it all you want, but it is hard work. And at the time, I didn't recognize that that's what I was doing. But I was not in fear of my father. I was not in fear of pleasing my mother. I was in fear of what God thought of me. I was in fear of how he perceived me, of what he wanted me to be, of what would happen to me if I ignored what he required of me. And he requires great things of all of us. And to reach that greatness, you have to be responsible. And here I am now, still working and trying to, you know, find my own ministry. Still working on, you know, getting more responsibilities. And it's not something that ever changes. It only gets harder and harder, but it gets better and better. Because it's hard work, but it's good work. It's the best work that you can do. And, you know, in any situation, you may never have to face something like that. But in any situation, you guys need to recognize, am I in fear of what the Lord thinks of me? Am I loving him with all my heart, soul, mind, and strength? Or am I in fear of the people around me? So, that's where I think I'm going to end it. That's about as far as I got in terms of writing. I had to rewrite this like 3 times. So, I will close this in prayer, and then we're going to split off into small groups. Junior high guys with me and Cameron. High school guys with Adam and Ben. And I don't know where the girls go. Sorry.